Hi, welcome to NDE TV. I'm Peggy Robinson. Today's guest is Dick Dingus. And Dick, you had a spiritually transformative experience in high school that seems like it kind of changed the course of your life into, becoming a pastor and getting involved in studying near-death experiences.
Yes, that's true.
Can you tell us about that experience?
Yes. Well, let me start before that.
Okay.
I didn't have any uh, regular religious training as a child. And so I had no formal religious training through high school until I was met in one of the hallways of our school by an upperclassman. His name was Russ Becker, and he gave me a tract, which was a little folded piece of paper that had scripture verses on it, and it invited me to connect with Jesus and pray with Russ. He invited me to pray, and so I said, "Okay, sounds good to me." And he invited me into the local Youth for Christ group, which met in the high school, MacArthur High School in West Hollywood, Florida. Uh, this was back in 1960. I was in the 10th grade. He was in the 11th. And my life changed as a result of that. Um, I felt a deep joy uh, as part of that group. I found a friendly peer group, which was different than the other peer groups I'd experienced in my life. Probably the most significant event was during a rally, a Youth for Christ rally at a church. And I was sitting alone, listening to someone sing, and all of a sudden I felt euphoric. Uh, it was just out of this world. Happiness, joy. It was like a wave overwhelmed me and washed over me. And I felt love and joy, peace, happiness. And that feeling lasted for months after that. It felt like I was walking on air. I enjoyed my peer relationships and I enjoyed reading the Bible. I'd had a Bible prior to that. I'd asked for one on my 12th birthday, but it was like an enigma to me. I could open it and I didn't understand it, and I couldn't very well read it, and uh, I just set it aside. But now, after this spiritually transformative experience and with my peer group, I understood the Bible when I read it, and I loved to read it. I was reading it avidly. Uh, I continued my relationship with my peers, with Youth for Christ. I started going to a local Christian and Missionary Alliance church with one of my peers. Sang in the choir, enjoyed participating. It was something new for me, and I really loved that experience. I could summarize it for myself is that I felt loved for the first time in my life, and I wanted to share this experience with others. Many of the group for Youth for Christ went to Nyack Missionary College. They were upperclassmen, and I decided that's where I wanted to go, because I wanted to become a minister so I could share this experience with others. I didn't see another vocation in which I could share such a spiritual experience. Uh, focused on the Bible, enjoyed company in church, fellowship. So I went to Nyack Missionary College and was graduated. Did not quite fit into the Christian Missionary Alliance. So I worked as a social worker, school teacher for 2 years. Then I joined the Navy, but at getting out of the Navy and after 4 years, I went to Gordon Conwell Theological Seminary and was graduated and affiliated with the United Church of Christ, a liberal Protestant denomination where I served for 26 years. I had some conflicts in the churches, but my main goal was to fulfill the passion that I had when I thought of entering the ministry, was to share God's love with people that were unacquainted with it, who did not have a spiritual experience. And so I sought to do that in the churches. What I found was the churches were pretty much content with themselves. They didn't want a lot of change. They were happy with the way things were going. They didn't want to hear about near-death experiences. They weren't interested in welcoming new members that hadn't experienced faith or spirituality before. I always had some conflict, but I continued in many churches, 6 or 7, over a period of 26 years. And finally, at the last conflict, I resigned. I didn't know what else I would do at the time, but within 6 months, I got a job as a hospice chaplain. And I felt that I had something to offer in hospice. People who were caregivers and patients in hospice acknowledge their need to understand life beyond and physical death. They need comfort. They need to know that God loves them. And I felt that I had learned a lot from my study of near-death experience that I could share with them. I had initially come acquainted with near-death experience when I served one of the churches early in my ministry, but not much was written then, just Raymond Moody's book, Life After Life, and the sequel to Life After Life. And so I put it aside until maybe 15 years later, when a woman approached me in my church in West Virginia. She said, "Have you read this book?" And she held up Betty Eadie's book, Embraced by the Light. Well, I had not read it, and I had not been keeping in touch with what was written in the field. But that started a new chapter for me in my study of near-death experience. And the little church was probably aghast with me when I expressed my enthusiasm over near-death experience. And I even formed a support group in that church for persons who had such experiences. I was on the radio or television, actually, locally, talking about it. And the church eventually voted me out because they didn't feel they could relate to me anymore. But I was on the right track for myself for studying near-death experience. And I kept up my study, eventually found a church in Virginia Beach, where I am now. And I thought perhaps this church was more accepting of concepts of near-death experience. This was the headquarters, and still is, of the Edgar Cayce Foundation and of his records. So some people were more acquainted with concepts beyond the Bible, or that are not so explicit in the Bible. And I related well with them, but again, there was conflict in the church. So I resigned and became a hospice chaplain. And there I used my knowledge of near-death experience to tell the most important truths that I understood, that everybody should know. First, that life continues beyond the physical. And second, that relationships continue. Loving relationships continue forever. And this was often acknowledged by the families I visited. Many of them would talk about having had dreams in which transitioned loved ones would appear to them. One woman was in hospice care, and she told me that her late husband had physically abused her during their marriage, and that for a long time after he died, he came and knelt at her bedside, asking her for forgiveness. And finally, she forgave him, and then he didn't appear at her bedside anymore. So those were the kind of experiences and stories that I encountered in affirmation of the truth that I shared. One family, the husband and grandfather was still alive, And when I went to visit with them the first time, I thought about what could I share with them that would be helpful. I wanted to share those two truths. So I broached those two truths, and the man who was dying said, "Yes, I know that happened to me." He hadn't even told his family. And he talked about being in the light and feeling the peace. And then I said to him, I said to the family, the second truth, we stay connected by love, even though one of us may transition to the spiritual realm. And he said, "Yes, I know this." And he told me a story. He had a high school friend who had died in an auto accident. And one day when this man, who's dying now in hospice care, was in his kitchen late at night, his transition friend came up to him, walking up the walkway to the back door. And they had a conversation through the screen door. His friend said, I asked God how you were doing, and I asked permission to come and visit with you. And God said, okay. And so here I am. And they talked and talked. Then his friend just said goodbye and turned around and walked away. So there was a family that already knew what I wanted to share with them. And they learned it from their dying husband, father, grandfather. And that was an eye-opening meeting for me. Anyway, I enjoyed my experience of working as a hospice chaplain for 15 years. And my wife became ill. Eventually, she had a series of strokes and eventually died. Ironically, she was not interested in near-death experience. And she didn't want to hear about it too much. She was a traditional Christian. She did a great job as a Christian educator, but she was traditional. After she died, I resigned from hospice after a time because we had adopted our 3 grandchildren. We were taking care of them together, but I just couldn't take care of the grandchildren and work a full-time job. And so I resigned from hospice. That was perhaps 3 or 4 years ago. But I stayed active in our local near-death experience group with Virginia Beach Friends of IANDS. And I became active in a metaphysical church, Fellowship of the Inner Light, where many of the videos of my talks are on their website. And most recently, I started what I call Strangers No More. It's a church based in a home, such as early Christians started meeting in homes. And we have a meal 6 o'clock, and then at 7:30 we open the meeting to Zoom audience, and we welcome speakers who come and talk to us about important things, near-death experience or healing or any number of related subjects. And the reason I started this church was I found that in the traditional church, a couple of things are lacking, and they're really important. One is the opportunity to respond to the speaker. Most churches you'll go, and the only response you can make is to put some money in the offering plate. You may get a chance to say hello to the speaker as you're leaving the church, but there's no formal setting or meeting afterwards in which you can talk about whatever the speaker presented. Nor is there an opportunity for people to share on something else, perhaps something they feel would be inspiring to the rest of the group. The early Christians met, and each one had the opportunity to share. Paul described such meetings. He said, what is it when you come together? One person brings a hymn or a song or a teaching. That's not permitted in churches today. So that's what I started, an opportunity for people to respond to a speaker and to share, to respond, and also to speak on topics that are really important that are not usually spoken about in church, such as near-death experience. It's just foreign to most churches. So we talk about all those topics, and we talk about extraterrestrials and the abduction program and the hybrid program. And anybody can share and anybody can respond. And it seems to me that that's what churches should be doing, talking about the most important things are literal offspring of God. This is not part of a traditional church. So that's what I've done. And let's see. I'm very happy doing it. I'm retired, but I'm fully occupied in the projects and the activities of my life. So that's my story.
Didn't you write a song about near-death experiences?
Oh yeah, I wrote a song. All right, let me tell you the story and then I'll sing the song. While I was in West Virginia, I put out an ad in the newspaper that people who had a near-death experience could contact me. And a woman contacted me, wishes to remain anonymous. I don't know if she's still alive. Her first name was, I'm going to change it to Susan. And she said that when she was about 12 years old, she had to have a tonsillectomy. And they put a mask over her face. It was the anesthesia mask. And she felt like she was falling. She fell a long ways. And when she arrived at the bottom, it was a dark place. And she heard a sound like a metal gate clanging. And while she was there, soon a being came, like an angel, and said, "Come with me." And took her by the arm, the upper arm, and they walked together. They sort of floated. They floated up a stairway, and they were met by another being coming down the stairs. And the being coming down said, "What's she doing here? It's not her time." And he said, "Wait." So he went up, came back down, and he said, "It's okay, she can come up." So she went up, and she said she came into this large room. It was maybe 30 yards wide, 20 yards wide, and it was translucent lights coming through the walls. And in the center of the room was a large pavilion, like steps going up, and then there was a chair on the top of it. And she went and she was led and she sat on one of the steps. And she saw a person coming in the room and sat on the chair. And she described the person, what he was wearing, and she said she knew it was Jesus. And he sat on the chair and he talked to her about her life. And he said, "I want you to look in that screen over there." And it was like a television set. And she looked into it and she saw her whole life. She had been adopted. I don't know if she even knew she was adopted, but she saw her birth parents. She saw her whole life. And I think it was in color. And then it changed to black and white at the present moment and continued in black and white. And she saw her children that would be born of her. And she got caught up in emotion as she was telling this story, because I'm not sure she remembered all of this before she was telling me the story. And then the video was over, and Jesus told her the purpose of her life. When she came back, she said she didn't remember all of those details, but she did remember the essence of it. She's seeing Jesus, seeing their life in the TV screen. Jesus said to her, "If you remembered all of this, it wouldn't happen the right way. It has to happen over time. You would hurry up and try to get it done." And then the angel came and was ready to escort her out of the room. She would look back to see Jesus on the chair, and that's when she woke up on the operating table. And the nurse said, "Thank God she's alive." So she had died. Well, I was so taken with her experience that I wrote a song. I'll attempt to sing it. I have a guitar somewhere, but it's not right here. Then I saw Jesus appear in glory. I felt his healing love flow through me. He looked into my eyes. My soul had no disguise. He knew me totally and loved me. I linger in the glow. His love still fills my soul. My heart still sings his song. In love we all belong. In love, my Lord, would you behold him? He's standing at your door. Be open. I sat in my living room in my home in West Virginia, and I wrote out this song, and I had a little toy keyboard, and I wrote down the notes, and then I took it to a shopping center and went to a piano store, and the manager there heard it, and he wrote out the harmony for me, and he wrote it out on a sheet of music. But I sang it at a IANDS conference once, and I got it copyrighted. But that's the song, and it tells the story of how much God loves us. Describes her meeting with Jesus, and when she looked into his eyes, she said she felt like liquid love was poured over her whole being. That was part of the song, and so that's the song.
Music was playing when you were singing.
What did you say?
Music was playing when you were singing.
No kidding. Okay, I didn't hear it.
Yeah, it was like almost like a little bit echo to your voice, but it was coming out as like a soft music.
I've heard of such happenings. A man in a wheelchair was in a nursing home, and they were having a sing-along in the dining room. So he went and they sang songs and everything. And as they were singing, it was the sound of angels singing with them that happened. And then this man who was stuck in his wheelchair got up and started dancing. And then after the music was all over, he sat back down in his wheelchair and left the room. But that was the experience. So we may have had an angel visitation.
It just seems like, I'm thinking about the churches that wasn't on board with what you were bringing to the table and how long it's taken science to even seriously consider NDEs as a possibility. And the magic that these bring with them it just makes me think, what a shame that we've had to live in this scientific dry world that says this stuff doesn't happen, it doesn't exist, and they're just missing the boat because it's such an intelligent, beautiful artistic realm that was what we're talking about.
I've tried to incorporate near-death experiencers into churches. If I meet them, I would welcome them into my church when I was a pastor. They weren't always accepted because they're so different. One of the key ideas that I've developed and working with is how we can change the world. And my opinion is, and my conviction, and I believe this is true, the church, the traditional church, has lost its effectiveness. What will be effective to change the world is near-death experiencers telling their stories. If you look at the way religions were established, you had one person, whether it be Jesus or Moses or Buddha or Muhammad, and they would gather some followers and they would go down through the centuries and eventually grow. Well, now we have thousands, if not millions, of people who have had transcendent experiences who can gather people to tell their story. So I think it's going to happen very rapidly. And not only are near-death experiencers changed, but so are persons who hear their story. So I'm looking forward to seeing the world changed. And I'm working toward world transformation. One of the things that I'm doing is establishing what I call a speakers bureau. I was having trouble finding speakers for Virginia Beach Friends of IANDS, so I began a search, and I found the monthly NDE, which is published anonymously by IANDS. And I asked if I couldn't be put in contact with some of those persons who had such marvelous stories to tell. And it could be done confidentially. They could send my contact information to those persons and they could contact me. Well, some of them did. And so we've got a speakers bureau of over 24 names now, so that local, and I'm going to distribute this to other IANDS groups and local leaders of groups. And it could go, you never know how far it'll go, but they'll be speaking about their experiences. It includes near-death experiencers, some that have had out-of-body experiences or spiritual transformation experiences, even psychics who regularly can access the spiritual realm. And I'm hoping this will be an influence to speed the transformation of the world. So I'm very happy doing all that I'm doing.
Yes, that's very needed. Almost like we need like a phone book of near-death experiencers, names and emails, because when I find my guests, I just go to other podcasts, other YouTube channels, and they do the same too. And not everyone lists a contact information for a guest. And if they're not on Facebook, sometimes I can't find them. I don't know how to reach these people.
All right, well, I'm reaching out, and the first edition is probably going to go out today with the 24 names and contact information, and then we'll have a second edition and further editions as more and more people are added to the list.
Awesome. I know I contacted everybody on the list you gave me that I hadn't already had as a guest. So you were one of them.
Okay.
I don't know why I didn't think of you before. I guess I didn't know you had an experience.
Well, thank you for providing this opportunity. And what else is important? I think one of the important topics is the Bible as an authority. Especially for Protestant churches, the tradition has been sola biblia, which was a doctrine promoted by Martin Luther, that the Bible is the only authority for life and spiritual life and work and belief. But the spiritual realm was pretty much closed, and people feared psychics, and they didn't talk about near-death experiences because everybody thought they would be crazy if they would talk about it, and that proved to be the outcome. But in this day, in modern day, near-death experience has become so common. It's part of the culture now, and people can accept this more readily. So we need to make a transition from the Bible to accepting firsthand experiences of the spiritual realm from near-death experiencers. And if we do that, that'll help to speed the transition from our world into one of peace and harmony and abundance. So I challenge.
One thing I've heard, like to have your opinion on it, is I keep hearing over and over, people are against religion. They say NDEers come back less religious, or it's got to be spiritual or religious, or they'll start putting I would have on my show and all of a sudden they start putting down religion. And I'm thinking, that's not what I'm trying to do here. I'm not trying to turn anybody away from religion or their faith, and I'm not trying to convert anybody either. Just hear people's stories as they experience them and view them. But I just see this push, like, to get rid of Christians through near-death experiences, through being spiritual. And I don't believe that at all, that most NDEers are no longer religious. I don't believe that. And I don't like it when people, not you, I'm talking about just stuff I keep hearing online and in videos, is someone says, "Oh, I'm so surprised to hear that you're religious because you had an NDE, and most NDEers are not religious." And I feel like they're trying to shun them, trying to take that part of their life out. And I see how much faith has been important through your life, through that first spiritual experience, and led you through the church, and led you through your careers and your life path still. What do you think? Do you see what I'm saying? Do you see it out there?
I understand what you said, but that has not been part of my experience. I have not experienced people saying that people shouldn't be part of a church. I have always encouraged, and for my own part, I've always encouraged near-death experiencers to become part of a church, to be an invigorating influence in a church. I have not found that they're well accepted. One church I preached at recently, a couple years ago, were several times where they were between pastors, and so they needed a pulpit supply. And I would go, and I felt free to talk about near-death experience. What could they do to me? They couldn't fire me because I wasn't hired. They could hear one message. If they liked it, they'd invite me back. And so we talked about near-death experience, and I found there were several people in that church who had near-death experiences, but they'd never talked about it before. So that helped them to feel free that they could talk about it with their peers and other church members. I do know that some people after, and probably more people move away from the traditional church after having a near-death experience than move into a church, though some do. Some become even more religious. And that would be the best thing. To be present as a light to brighten the life in the church. And so I encourage that.
Yeah, I find it very sad that people are shunned from their churches when they say they've had a near-death experience. And even told that it's the devil or it's evil or something like that.
It's easy to be judgmental here, but I think people in churches are content. They've grown up with in an atmosphere of faith. It may not have much excitement to it. It may be mostly a social experience. And the women's group, the fundraisers, but yet the church does a good job of providing a place for people to experience life together. And it is a good life. They do good things. They're not about anything bad. And they often make a good contribution to society. But the problem is churches are not attracting new people in the way that they used to do this. And the current populations in the church are getting older. And many traditional churches the congregations are so dwindling that there are not enough people and not enough income to support the building. The building needs maintenance. A church I served in Linfield, Massachusetts, just closed in December because they didn't have enough people. They closed, they sold the building to another church that was bustling with people. But many churches are not bustling and they'll close. That's why I started Strangers No More, the home church. We don't have a capital building. We didn't build a building. We don't have to pay rent anywhere. And we don't have to pay a preacher. We don't have to pay anything. People just meet in a home and they share the expense of a meal. They do it voluntarily. If they want to contribute something, they do. Otherwise, we just provide the food. And I offer this as an option for churches in the future who are unable to sustain their life and have to sell their building and close operations. They could continue to meet in homes. That's the way early Christians met. And it provides a setting for developing relationships, spiritual growth, learning. We ask people to wear a name tag if they come in. That's why we're called strangers no more. So the people won't be a stranger if they come. If you go to a traditional church, you can sit next to somebody for years and not know much about them, not even know their name, perhaps, because you might have a moment of fellowship in which people get up and pass the peace and shake one another's hand, but then they sit down. This idea dawned on me one day at church when, after the last amen at the traditional church service, people got up to greet one another. And there was so much energy. People looking forward to talking to their friends. I said, why isn't this part of the traditional church service? And of course, it's not. So I helped to make it happen, to make it part of a normal church service by having strangers no more. I had a dream after that. In the dream, I was in my backyard digging a hole, which would be the footing for a cross. And I knew that the dream meant I would be starting a church. And it was after that that I just started meeting in my home. And we started meeting outside. We have our meals outside, weather permitting, mosquitoes permitting. And it's been very successful. So I am happy. And near-death experience has been an integral part of my learning and the excitement of my life and my teachings. And the essence is physical death is not the end of life. We are spiritual beings in physical bodies, and we shed these bodies and continue to live in an expanded awareness in spirit. And we become, I would say, meld into universal mind, in which all knowledge seems accessible. And we continue living as the literal offspring of God forever. Truly a fascinating concept. And there are other fascinating concepts, but that's enough for that.
Thank you so much. It seems like a good place to end, doesn't it?
Yes.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you for this opportunity.
Bye-bye.
Bye.